April 14, 1945. 4:09 p.m. Wiesental, Germany. First Sergeant Samuel Reardon walks through a broken orchard behind a ruined mill and stops so hard his boots skid in the wet grass. For a half-second his brain refuses to label what his eyes are showing him. Then it clicks into place and everything inside him goes cold. 78 German soldiers are staring back. Not across a battlefield. Not from behind cover. Not through smoke at a distance. They're right there, in a tight knot between the mill wall and a stone cattle shed, close enough that Reardon can see stubble on their chins and the steam of their breath. Half of them already have rifles in their hands. The other half are snatching weapons from a heap on the ground like men grabbing life preservers from a sinking ship. And in the center of it, on their knees in the mud, are 3 American paratroopers with their hands laced behind their heads. These Germans were prisoners 10 minutes ago. 55 of them captured by Reardon's platoon during a street fight in this village. 20 more scooped up by another squad on the far side of the creek. A handful more staggered in afterward, hands up, looking for someone to surrender to before the war ended around them. They were corralled behind the mill, guarded by 3 men. All that could be spared. Everyone else was inside the village clearing houses, hunting the last pockets of resistance. Now the guards are disarmed. The prisoners are free. They're armed. They're organizing. And they're facing exactly the direction they need to face to hit Company B in the back. A German officer steps forward, quick and hard. He's young, maybe 25, face tight with panic and authority. He shoves a pistol, small, black, ugly, into Reardon's chest so sharply it knocks Reardon's web gear sideways. The officer is shouting in German. Fast. Furious. Spittle flying. Reardon doesn't speak German. Neither do the Americans behind him. The officer shouts again, louder, his face flushing red as if volume can substitute for comprehension. Reardon looks at the Germans. Looks at his kneeling men. Looks at the muzzle pressed into his ribs. And then, for reasons that won't make sense to anyone who wasn't there, Samuel Reardon starts whistling. Not quietly. Not nervously. Not some faint tune a man makes when he's trying to calm himself. He whistles loud and bright and steady, a clean, almost cheerful melody that sounds completely wrong in a muddy German farmyard full of armed enemies. The German officer pauses like someone has slapped him. His expression twists into confusion, then anger. He barks something. The pistol digs harder. Reardon whistles louder. What happens next takes less than 90 seconds. 19 Germans will die. The rest will throw down their weapons and surrender. And Samuel Reardon will earn the Medal of Honor for one of the strangest, most aggressive acts of small unit combat in the last month of World War II. All because he wouldn't stop whistling. Samuel Everett Reardon was born July 3, 1919, in South Boston, Massachusetts, where the streets were narrow, the winters were sharp, and the men learned early how to keep their shoulders square. His father worked the docks. His mother ran a boarding house that never seemed to have enough food but always had enough opinions. Reardon grew up fast. He had to. He was the oldest of 4, which meant he was a third parent before he was old enough to shave. By the time he graduated high school in 1937, he'd already been breaking up fights, running errands, patching holes in shoes, and keeping his brothers from doing anything that would get them killed. The Great Depression didn't just make life hard. It made it tight. Like a belt pulled too far. Jobs were scarce. Pride was expensive. College was for other people. Reardon worked wherever he could, warehouse shifts, hauling crates, painting boats, delivering meat in the early morning when the city still smelled like coal smoke and salt. Then the world caught fire. By 1941, Europe was already bleeding. Asia was already burning. America was pretending it could stand at a distance and watch. Pearl Harbor ended the pretending. February 1942, Congress expands the draft and the enlistment lines turn into rivers. Reardon's number comes up. He reports to the induction center in Boston. He's 22 years old. 5'7". 155 pounds. The army doctor glances at him and probably thinks, steady worker. Maybe a truck driver. Maybe a supply sergeant. They're wrong. Reardon volunteers for the airborne. In 1942, airborne forces are still half myth, half experiment. Jumping out of planes into the dark and landing behind enemy lines to fight surrounded. It sounds like a fast route to a grave for most men. The volunteers are not most men. Airborne training is designed to break you. Not metaphorically. Literally. Blisters that split open and bleed through socks. Knees that swell. Shoulders rubbed raw by web gear. Days that start before dawn and end when you can barely keep your eyes open. Then the towers. Then the mock doors. Then the real aircraft. The first time you step out into nothing, your body screams to grab the frame. Everything in you says, this is wrong. This is suicide. The ground is too far. The wind is too loud. Your parachute is fabric and cord and prayer. Reardon steps anyway. He earns his jump wings and gets assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, in an airborne infantry regiment that will spend the next 2 years moving around like a coiled spring, training, waiting, training again. He becomes the man who can be relied on. Not flashy. Not loud. The kind of soldier who remembers details and gets things done. By the time the unit ships to England, Reardon is already a squad leader. By the time the invasion comes, he'll be a platoon sergeant, because in war, vacancies appear fast and leadership is often just the last man still standing who knows what to do. June 6, 1944. 1:12 a.m. Over Normandy. The C-47 trembles as flak blooms outside like black flowers. Reardon stands in the stick, one hand on the static line, equipment biting into his shoulders. 50, 60 pounds of gear, ammunition, grenades, rations, medical kit, entrenching tool, spare socks nobody will have time to change into. The plane is too low. The pilots can't climb. German anti-aircraft fire is everywhere. Tracers arc up through the night like angry insects. You can hear the fragments pinging off the fuselage. You can smell hot metal and sweat and fear. The green light comes on. Reardon jumps. The prop blast hits him like a punch. For a second there's only wind and noise and the sensation of falling into a void. Then the chute snaps open and the world becomes quiet in the way only a parachute descent can be quiet, quiet enough to hear your own breathing and the distant crack of rifles. Below him is France. Occupied France. Enemy territory in every direction. The airborne drop is chaos. Formations are scattered. Men land in the wrong fields, the wrong hedgerows, the wrong villages. Some drown in flooded marshes under the weight of their equipment. Some land in the middle of German units and die before they can cut free. Reardon hits the ground hard, rolling through a hedgerow and slamming his knee into a hidden rock. Pain flares hot and immediate. He checks quickly, nothing broken. He can walk. He can fight. That's all that matters. He gathers his chute, stuffs it into a ditch, and starts moving. In the darkness he finds 2 other paratroopers. Then 3 more. Then a man from a different company who's lost and shaking with adrenaline. By dawn Reardon has a small knot of survivors, all of them looking for direction. He gives it to them. For 2 days they move through hedgerows, avoiding roads, hitting German patrols when they have to, listening for American artillery and moving toward it like sailors steering by sound. Reardon takes point more often than he should, because he's good at it and because leadership sometimes means being the first one to get shot at. They finally link up with friendly lines bruised, exhausted, and alive. Reardon earns a Bronze Star that he never talks about, because in Normandy everyone did something they never talk about. September 17, 1944. Holland. Operation Market Garden is the biggest airborne operation in history. The plan is ambitious enough to sound like fiction: capture bridges, open a highway, drive straight into Germany. If it works, the war ends early. If it fails loudly. Everything depends on timing and surprise and the assumption that the enemy won't be where you need him not to be. The enemy is exactly where you need him not to be. The drop zones are hot. The landing is rough. The fighting is immediate. Reardon's company spends days in the flat Dutch countryside where every ditch is a trench and every tree line is a firing line. They hold positions under artillery that hits with the steady rhythm of a metronome. It becomes a war of inches. Mud. Smoke. Bodies. And the constant awareness that the big picture is collapsing somewhere north near Arnhem, where British paratroopers are being ground down by armor. Reardon doesn't see Arnhem. He sees his men. His sector. The next 50 yards. He learns something in Holland that will matter later: panic spreads fast, but so does confidence. A calm voice can stabilize a whole squad. A single aggressive move can shove an enemy backward even when you're outnumbered. He files that away, the way experienced soldiers file away lessons they don't know they'll need yet. December 1944. The Ardennes. The Germans launched their last offensive. A massive lunge through the winter forest, tanks and infantry driving through thin American lines. The weather turns the battlefield into a freezer. Men freeze in place. Weapons jam. Engines won't turn over. The cold is as deadly as the enemy. And then rumors begin moving through the ranks: prisoners executed. Men shot after surrendering. Atrocities whispered from foxhole to foxhole like a disease. Reardon hears about a massacre at a crossroads. Artillery observers and radio men cut down in a field after they laid down their arms. The details shift depending on who tells it, but the core remains: surrender did not mean survival. Something hardens in him. He doesn't say it out loud. He doesn't need to. The men around him feel it too. The unspoken rules fray. The war gets meaner. The line between fighting and killing thins. Reardon decides privately, in the small locked place inside his chest where decisions like this get made, he will not be taken. Not by panic. Not by surprise. Not by men who might decide later that prisoners are inconvenient. That decision will matter in April. April 14, 1945. Wiesental, Germany. The war is almost over, and that makes it dangerous in a different way. German units are fragmenting. Some fight because they're fanatics. Some fight because they're terrified of what happens if they quit. Some fight because they have no idea what's happening beyond the next ridge. Allied units are pushing fast, moving through villages that are half empty and half booby-trapped. There are white flags and hidden rifles. Surrenders and last stands. A constant question: is this man giving up, or getting close? Company B gets orders to clear Wiesental, a small village straddling a creek with a mill, a church, and a cluster of stone houses packed tight together like they're trying to keep warm. The resistance is light at first. A few shots. A few grenades. Then a sudden burst of machine gun fire from an upstairs window that drops a private in the street. Reardon's platoon responds the way experienced infantry responds: quickly, violently, with no hesitation. They clear house by house. They kick in doors. They throw grenades into rooms they can't see. They shout in English and German and hand signals. They find civilians crouched in basements and old men trembling and teenage boys wearing uniforms too big for them. By mid-afternoon, the last organized German pocket collapses near the mill. Hands go up. Rifles are tossed out. Men stumble into the open, exhausted and filthy, relieved to be alive. Reardon's platoon collects prisoners, more than they can comfortably handle. 55 at first. Then more. A squad on the far side of the creek brings 20 more. A few stragglers wander in as if drawn by the gravitational pull of surrender. They corral them behind the mill because it's fenced and partially sheltered from the street. It's a temporary solution. A holding pen. Reardon doesn't like it, but the village isn't fully secure and manpower is thin. He can spare 3 guards. That's it. He tells them to keep the prisoners seated. Keep the weapons piled. Keep your eyes open. Reinforcements will come when they come. Then he goes back into the village to finish the job. He has no idea what's about to happen behind him. A German patrol approaches the mill from the orchard line. 8 men, maybe 10, wearing camouflage smocks that blend into spring green and brown. They move low, fast, disciplined. They see the prisoners. They see the weak guard. They see an opportunity. The guards don't realize what's happening until the Germans are already among them. A rifle butt cracks into one American's jaw. Another is grabbed from behind, his weapon twisted away. A third raises his rifle and hesitates for a fraction of a second because he sees Germans with hands up and assumes they're still prisoners. That hesitation costs everything. The Germans disarm the guards, force them down to their knees, and in seconds the prison pen flips from containment to mutiny. The prisoners surge to the weapons pile. Rifles are snatched up. Magazines slapped in. Bolts cycled. Men who were sitting in defeat minutes ago stand up with a sudden new spine. 78 German soldiers, armed and reorganizing. And they don't need a map to know what to do next. Company B is spread out, squads in houses, men moving room to room, clearing basements, checking attics. If 78 armed Germans hit them from behind, it's not a firefight. It's a slaughter. A German officer takes charge. He starts pointing, assigning positions, setting an ambush line along the mill wall and the cattle shed. They're moving with frightening speed, the kind of speed that comes from fear and desperation and training. This is the moment when a war that's almost over can still kill a lot of people. Reardon walks toward the mill because he's checking on the prisoner situation. Routine. Habit. A sense that things left unattended go wrong. He comes through the orchard line, steps around a broken wheelbarrow, and sees the scene. His guards on their knees. Germans everywhere. Weapons coming up. An officer snapping orders. Reardon stops dead. The German officer spots him instantly. The stripes on his sleeve mark him as leadership, as leverage, as a prize. The officer strides forward, shoves a pistol into Reardon's chest, and shouts in German. Surrender. Drop your weapon. Put your hands up. Something like that. Reardon doesn't understand a word, but he understands the situation perfectly. He is one man standing in front of 78 armed enemies, with 3 of his soldiers disarmed and kneeling, and his company exposed behind him. The math is impossible. The sensible thing is to comply. Raise your hands. Live. But the memory of executed prisoners has been sitting in Reardon's mind for months like a stone. And the thought of these Germans getting loose behind his company locks something into place. Reardon decides he would rather die moving than live kneeling. So he whistles. A clear, loud, almost jaunty tune that cuts through the yard like a knife. The German officer freezes, confused by the sound. Several Germans glance at each other. A couple of them actually laugh, involuntarily, because the situation is absurd, an American NCO with a pistol in his chest whistling like he's walking home from a baseball game. The officer shouts again, furious now, trying to force the moment back into the script where prisoners look scared and obedient. Reardon whistles louder. The officer's face goes red with rage. And in that thin slice of time, those 2 or 3 seconds where everyone's brain is busy processing the wrongness, Reardon moves. Slowly at first, as if he's finally complying. His M1A1 Thompson is slung across his shoulder. The standard carry. A submachine gun heavy with familiarity. Reardon reaches up with exaggerated care, fingers wrapping the grip. He begins to slide the strap forward like a man offering up his weapon. The German officer watches closely. Good, his posture says. Finally. The Germans behind him relax just slightly. Shoulders drop. A few rifles angle down. It's a small shift, but in close combat small shifts are doors opening. Reardon's hand finds the trigger. And then he stops pretending. One motion. Fast. Violent. Clean. He whips the Thompson down and fires from the hip at point-blank range. The first burst hits the officer in the chest and throat. The man's body jerks backward like he's been yanked by a rope. He drops without finishing his sentence. Reardon doesn't pause. He can't pause. The moment he shoots, there's no negotiation left in the universe. There is only killing or being killed. He pivots and rakes the nearest cluster of Germans. The Thompson thunders. 45 caliber rounds slam into bodies with heavy, ugly authority. Men fall into the mud. A rifle clatters. Someone screams a word that sounds like a question. Reardon's first magazine empties in seconds. This is the moment where most lone men die. The reload moment. The tiny gap where time stretches out and the enemy remembers they have guns. Reardon reloads anyway. He drops the empty magazine, slams in a fresh one, works the bolt with a practiced snap. Muscle memory. Training compressed into a single blur. And he's yelling now, not in German, not in anything the enemy needs to understand. He's yelling to his kneeling men. Get up. Take their rifles. Move. The three guards scramble. Hands slip in mud. A wounded man pulls himself forward and grabs a fallen Kar 98K like it's a life raft. Another rips a pistol from a dead officer's belt and fires wildly, then steadies, then fires again. The Germans are in chaos. Their leader is dead. The American who should have been disarmed is shooting. The prisoners who should have been controlled are now pinned in a sudden storm of gunfire. Some Germans shoot back, but many hesitate, because their line of fire is crowded with their own men. Some try to move into position, but there is no time. A German with an MP-40 raises it toward Reardon. Reardon hits him first. A rifle cracks from the shed corner. A round snaps past Reardon's ear. Another punches into the mill wall behind him, stone dust puffing like smoke. Reardon keeps moving. He uses aggression like armor, stepping forward into the yard, firing short bursts, picking targets, not spraying, not wasting. He's close enough to see faces. Eyes wide. Mouths open. Men who had believed they were seconds from freedom now discovering they are seconds from death. A German tries to charge him with a bayonet. Reardon drops him at 5 feet. His guards are firing now too, braced against the mill wall, shooting into the knot of Germans trying to rally. The crossfire turns the yard into a trap. The Germans break. Not all at once. Not neatly. But the will collapses like wet cardboard. Rifles drop. Hands go up. Men back away. The ones still uninjured begin shouting "Nicht Skiassen," and "Kamerad," and other surrender words that American soldiers have learned to recognize without translation. 90 seconds. 19 Germans are dead. Several more wounded. The rest, more than 50, are standing with hands raised, faces pale, eyes flicking between Reardon's Thompson and the bodies in the mud. The prisoners are prisoners again. Reardon stands in the center of the yard with smoke curling from the barrel of his gun and mud on his knees, breathing hard, hearing his own pulse. One of his guards is bleeding from the forehead. Another is shaking so violently his rifle rattles. Reardon looks at the surrendered Germans and says, almost conversationally, like a man commenting on weather, "That was the dumbest thing you could have tried." The aftermath is messy and fast. Company B rushes in, drawn by the gunfire. Officers shout questions. Men look at the dead Germans and then at Reardon like he's a ghost who decided to stay. The surrendered Germans are marched to the rear under heavy guard, heavy in a way the first guard detail had not been. Weapons are collected. The mill yard is secured. The village is secured. Reardon writes the incident up as a factual report, because that's what you do. You put it on paper. You make it official. You make it something that can be filed. But stories don't stay in files. They travel. From platoon to platoon. From battalion to battalion. The first sergeant who whistled in the face of 78 armed Germans and then killed their officer and broke the whole escape attempt with a Thompson. When the Medal of Honor recommendation begins moving upward, nobody who reads the statements doubts the core fact: Reardon was overwhelmingly outnumbered, under immediate threat, with his men captured, and he attacked anyway. The citation language will be polished, formal, cleaned of mud and profanity. It will say things like, "with conspicuous gallantry," and, "at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty." It will not say what the men in the village say afterward, which is simpler: "He should have died. He didn't. Because he moved first." October 18, 1945. Washington, D.C. The White House. The war is over. The uniforms are crisp. The air smells like polished wood and expensive soap, not wet earth and cordite. President Harry Truman steps forward with the medal in his hands. Reardon stands at attention, shoulders squared, eyes forward. He looks uncomfortable in the way combat soldiers often look in clean rooms. Like the walls are too close and the silence is too loud. Truman places the Medal of Honor around his neck. And Truman says a line he's said before, but means every time: "I'd rather have this than be president." Reardon doesn't smile. Not really. He nods once, because what do you do with that sentence when you're a dockworker son from South Boston who learned to fight in alleys and hedgerows? The war ends and Samuel Reardon goes home. He doesn't write a book. He doesn't go on tour. He doesn't become a politician or a paid speaker. He doesn't turn the worst 90 seconds of his life into a career. He marries a nurse he met in a hospital ward when he was recovering from shrapnel wounds. They move into a small house outside Boston. They have 2 sons and a daughter. Reardon works a steady job for the city: maintenance, inspections, the kind of work that keeps things running and doesn't get noticed unless it fails. The medal stays in a drawer. When people ask about Wiesental, he shrugs. "Bad situation," he says. "Had to do something." If pressed, if someone really insists, he mentions the whistling. He says he wasn't trying to be brave. He says he whistled because his father used to whistle on the docks when storms came in, and it always meant, "Keep moving, keep working, don't let the weather tell you what to do." He says the officer was yelling in German and it made him think of men yelling on the docks when a crate slipped, and he laughed inside because it was the same human panic in a different language. He says the whistling bought him a second. And in combat, a second is an ocean. May 2, 1996. Quincy, Massachusetts. Samuel Everett Reardon dies of a heart attack at 76. His funeral is quiet. Local. A color guard. A folded flag. Men who served with him, old now, moving slowly, standing under a gray sky and remembering a muddy yard behind a mill in Germany where the war almost killed them. He is buried with military honors. Years pass. A small park in South Boston is named after him. A plaque is mounted on a wall. People walk by without reading it. Kids play basketball 10 feet away and never notice the bronze letters. Most people never hear the name Samuel Reardon. They know the famous heroes. The ones in movies. The ones in textbooks. They don't know the first sergeant who whistled at 78 Germans with a pistol in his ribs and turned an escape attempt into a surrender in 90 seconds. Here's what the story of Samuel Reardon tells you. War doesn't favor the biggest. It doesn't favor the loudest. It doesn't favor the men who look like heroes in photographs. War favors the ones who keep thinking when everyone else is trapped inside the obvious answer. At Wiesental, the obvious answer was surrender. The math was brutal. 78 against 1. 3 of his men already disarmed. His company exposed behind him. Any rational person would have raised his hands. But Reardon wasn't thinking about the math. He was thinking about what happens when armed men get loose behind your line. He was thinking about prisoners who don't stay alive. He was thinking about his kneeling soldiers in the mud and the men in the village who would get hit from behind if those Germans broke out. So he whistled. Maybe as a tactic. Maybe out of stress. Maybe because the moment was so absurd his brain chose the only thing it could do besides freeze. And while the German officer was confused, while the yard tilted off balance for just long enough, Reardon made his move. 90 seconds later, he was still standing. That's what courage looks like when it's not clean. Not speeches. Not flags. Not perfect certainty. Just a man with a gun in his ribs, 78 enemies in front of him, and the decision, made in a single locked heartbeat, that he will not kneel.